right, we are back. This is the modern life of the Audi RS4. This, first time you're seeing it, is my new to me B7 RS4 in Sprint Blue. And today we're going to talk about my initial impressions. I've had this car just over a week, so we're going to talk a little bit about my initial impressions on the outside. We'll talk about the inside, go for another little drive. But first, before we get to that, let's talk about meeting your hero. Should you meet your hero? Should I have bought this car? People, authors, athletes, actors, whatever, I'm going to go with no. Probably not a great idea. Actors spend their entire life making you think that they are someone that they're not. But what about cars or experiences? That trip to Hawaii, that hot air balloon ride, buying a car that you've saw on Top Gear, that you've dreamed about a little bit, or a lot of bit, maybe, I don't know. Should you do it? I'm going to give you two examples. Obviously, this is going to be an example. This will be example number two. Example number one, 2020, before COVID, doing a little car shopping, and I've always really liked the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio. And so I kind of popped it into Auto Trader and I said, hey, is this even possible? A dealership near me in Kansas City had a brand new 2018, again, this is in 2020, a brand new 2018 Quadrifoglio on the showroom. Dark blue, beautiful yellow calipers. And I said, I wonder if they'd let me drive that. They probably won't, but it's worth a shot. More money than I wanted to spend, but also a car that I really, really wanted to get some exposure to. So I called the dealership, made an appointment, went in. They wouldn't let me drive it that day because it was cold and rainy, but they said, come back on a nice day, let you drive it. And so I did. It was a great car. In fact, this car reminds me a lot of that Quadrifoglio. Maybe that's something we can talk about at a different point. But the Quadrifoglio was awesome. It drove well. The engine was responsive. It was the first car that I ever drove that I really felt like it was properly set up from a steering and suspension standpoint. I really felt that I knew that car within about 10 minutes, which I can't say with other cars. But it just wasn't for me. Like, for whatever reason, it wasn't grabbing me enough to make that stretch for that budget. But I was really happy I did it. I met that hero car. It wasn't for me. I'm glad I did it. And I moved on. What about this? This is also kind of a hero car for me. And after 1 week, I've got it cleaned up. I've got some stuff going on that I'm, making it mine. And I'm really, really excited. So let's spend a couple minutes talking about the things that I like so far, my initial impressions of this car. So let's start with the front. How's the front? Well, the front, it's still really good, but it's probably the most dated part of the car. Not a big deal. You can probably notice that my license plate frame, it's not right. Don't worry. I know it's not an RS4. We're going to fix that. The back, I think, is also a little dated, but man, I think it's awesome. I love the back. The best part, though, of the car so far is the side profile. The side profile still looks modern. It still looks great. It's fantastic. My favorite part overall, though, is this little guy right here. This little part looks so muscular. It looks great. It looks fantastic. It's really something that I think is a really great feature of the car. So let's stop there and let's go ahead on inside. Okay, now let's talk about the inside of this car. In my personal opinion, the inside is where most cars nowadays can feel a bit outdated. They have a screen that's not super high res, they don't have the gauge cluster info, etc., etc. That can really date a car. But the question is, does that really matter? And maybe to some people it does. I thought it did to me. But inside this car, I have a nav screen. It's kind of low, but it's also not kind of high like in my B9. The screen was nice in my B9, but it felt kind of stuck there and sometimes kind of in the way. This has not a digital cluster, minus the little guy in the middle. Do I really need that? I don't know. I think this is a beautiful cluster, and I think, in fact, if you were to go and design a retro Audi cluster, it might look like this. So I think this is great. Everything else, switches, controls, all that stuff's pretty standard. That hasn't changed much, you know, in cars. This car is a little smaller than the other ones. Not really a big deal. But other than that, it's simple. It's clean. It's elegant. You would say this is a 2007, and okay, sure, but it doesn't really feel like a 2007. This is the oldest car I've ever bought. Yeah, I've had some cars that were older when I had them at this point, but I never bought a car that's 15 years old, and honestly, mileage has a good thing to do with it. This car has very low miles, but it doesn't really feel that old. Yeah, there are some little squeaks and rattles sometimes, especially when it's cold. It's really not that bad. Honestly, not any worse than my B9 S4. That had some squeaks and rattles in it. But other than that, it's in great shape. Leather's good. It's not great. It's still good, but it's comfortable. It's really comfortable. The one thing, though, that is the most, my biggest observation so far is how this car rides. I know it's not really in the inside, but we'll get to that in a second. This car has a pretty firm ride, but it's not harsh. And you don't really feel it in your backside. You feel it kind of up here in the lateral movement of the car. So I think over a long trip, if that doesn't bother you, which doesn't really bother me, this could be a really, really comfortable car to take a road trip in. But that's probably for another day. Let's go for a bit of a drive, and I'll talk about some of the things so far that I've noticed driving this car in the first week of ownership. Okay, so now we're up for a drive. Very first impression of this car, after I bought it, not including the time when I test drove it to own it, first impression was the gears are really short. First gear, unless I'm at a complete stop at a stoplight, first gear is almost pointless. Just start in second gear. Just don't forget you start in second gear, otherwise you'll stall it like I did, a little rusty, after not having driven a stick for 6 or 7 years. On the top end, 6th gear, 75 miles an hour, you're over 3,000 RPMs, which in a modern car, that's unheard of. So it definitely is geared, I'm going to say like a race car. I know it's not a race car, but it's definitely geared more like an older car and more like a car that you would track. Don't know if it's a big deal. 3,000 RPMs isn't that much, especially when you've got 5,200 more to go, which is probably around 1,500 or 2,000 more than other cars have to rev out, so maybe it's not that big a deal. I don't know. Just an observation. We talked a bit about the ride. Ride is good. I think it handles the bumps well. It is a bit more firm, so you do feel it a bit more, but the one part I do really like is that you don't hear it. A lot of cars that are cheaper, you hear the suspension, you hear the road noise, then you hear, I don't know if this is really what the noise is, but you hear the noise as the suspension kind of reaches its hit point. This, you don't get that. It feels premium, feels good, big fan. Would be nice if it had an adaptive system, to kind of keep things in check when you're just kind of cruising around, but that's okay. Not a big deal. Alright, so here comes some open road here. Obviously, one of my favorite parts is this V8. I mean, come on. Just freaking fantastic. That light was the speed warning. I guess I have one of those turned on. I gotta go figure out how to turn that off, because we don't want that happening all the time. That was a nice third gear pull. The engine is great. The gear shifts are great. The visibility is great. I talked about this last time. This thing handles like a dream. Doesn't matter. Of all the things and the little gripes here and there that I've had so far about, maybe it's not the most modern looking, it's a little stiff, the interior's got a few things missing, it's older. Doesn't matter. I don't drive this car every day. This car is when I need to drive, my wife's gone and I can't take her car, or when there's a nice day like today and I just want to go for a drive. None of those things really matter. The parts that I really like, the parts that are awesome,